I'm going to admit right up front that I'm heading into this week of November 11th already frustrated with just really so many communication glitches that just seem to defy reason. And going into November 11th, this is going to be even more heightened. And that's because on Monday, Mercury, who is retrograde, so I think we can definitely, I usually say we can blame anything on the moon, but I'm right now going to say we can blame anything on Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. And Monday, he is going to be exactly aligned with the Scorpio sun. Now, ordinarily, Mercury with the sun gives us solar-powered thinking, right? It would ordinarily ramp up the volume of our rather ingenious ideas because we would just be getting flashes of intuitive knowledge. That's knowledge that would only do us any good if we can sort it out into something reasonable. So we'll notice here that Mercury in Scorpio, can be, metaphorically, it's like solid, impenetrable ice. And this week on Tuesday, we have what should be a beautiful full moon to look at because it will be in Taurus Earth. But Taurus is famously not only determined and Rock of Gibraltar, but combined with this Mercury, I think we're going to see the stubborn and very fixed side of Taurus. That is feeling like we just want to dig our heels in and not budge on what we believe is true. I'm going to suggest that we not only suspend belief, but that we also suspend disbelief and allow what is serpentine, what is or has been waiting in the wings, hiding in the shadows, to make an appearance with us being, well, as comfortable as we can be with not knowing. In fact, it's a great time to pull up that humility that we think we know so many things, but if you've read about that black swan theory, we actually don't know the things we don't know, right? And they are going to be dished up in our face this week because the Taurus full moon on Tuesday, remember the full moon is always illumination of something that you haven't seen before. And now we can say that's going to be maximized, perhaps times 10, because Mercury in Scorpio can be very penetrating insight, no question. But it is also looking at the depths of what motivates us. And the communications from this messenger planet in Scorpio, and I'm not even counting the fact that it's retrograde. I'll get to that in a minute. But this communications messenger in Scorpio refuses to mince words. Language can be really quite sharp because there's no interest in like sparing someone's feelings by not telling them the difficult truth. So we're going to see a lot of that, even more so this coming week. And communications also are going to have a flavor of secrecy because Mercury in Scorpio, when the communications do come out, when, water signs, especially Scorpio, hold in emotions, and yet at the same time, you'll find yourself, I know I have already, swayed by some very strong emotional factors with that tinge of, mistrust. So this is our private detective, right, who is always investigating, researching, And so this is a great time to do that, as a matter of fact. But Scorpio is almost always a little mistrustful of others. But here we're going to have obstacles that are in the arena of deceit, out and out deceit, seeing where someone was absolutely plotting in a determined way to deceive us with some communications. But of course, we have our eyes wide open, reading the stars. It always helps. So we can understand what I've just been talking about, that flavor of Mercury and Scorpio. We can understand that both the ego can get hold of that and interpret it on its terms, but we can also choose not to hear that, and we can choose to see the light beyond all of it, whether it's a deception or whether it's obstacles in our path. We can choose to see that light beyond of understanding. And I find the only way to do that is by putting my trust in spirit, by putting my trust in the fact that my soul does have a mission here, and I am able to figure out what that is, even though I have all these distractions of the body. I can always choose to pause in peace and then act in awareness. Now, when I'm upset, like you, right, I don't feel like pausing. So this does require that word that some of us skirt around, which is discipline. The Course in Miracles says that our minds, the ego mind, is just wildly undisciplined. But the clarity of the spiritual voice, the quiet voice of peace, the quiet voice of love, is always helpful and always reasonable. So let me give you an example of how I see this in retrograde motion, because, usually with Mercury retrograde, it means we just want to take that pause and peace inner and not do so much of trying to make something work in the outer world, especially like technology this week, because our true mission here is as a spiritual warrior. It is as an avatar bringing light into the world. When something is particularly dark, that's especially helpful. So this is the way it works for me. At the end of a busy day last week, I sat down and looked at some of the headlines. And, for when I'm pausing in peace doing that, not in anxiety, but with a clear head, then I can see the archetypes appear in those headlines. And so one jumped off the page at me, so to speak, and it was about the protests that we now see all over the world. Now, remember, that's the projected outer for what is really being created inner. So inside ourselves, our spiritual warriors are in a kind and generous way, generous-spirited way, shining a light on something mysteriously dark. So that what grabbed me was a quote, "Not since the Arab Spring have we seen so many simultaneous protests throughout the world." Now, the reason that grabs me is because the astrology of that Arab Spring had to do with the shift in powerful Pluto and Uranus, the god of lightning, who were in sort of a strain with one another, so that there was a great deal of desire to transform. However, it had the god of lightning always upsetting the apple cart with impulsive decisions and actions. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you that is because that whole era from the Arab Spring has been clearing the decks and setting the stage for us to be able to understand this new 500-year cycle that, we're in it right now heavily because it's going to peak this very January of 2020. So now I'm going to reveal my secret for understanding. So I wanted to quickly grab a pen and paper. I wanted to write down that quote before I forget it. But I didn't have a paper near me. In fact, I had my favorite magazine, the Sun magazine. So I just picked up a pen and wrote in the margins of the magazine. Now, that would seem a random act, right? Random to the ego, but in the Tao for spirit. The next day, when I went to my Google Docs to write about the quote, I saw this miraculous synchronicity. I had written in the margins of the magazine, but it was from a March issue of 2018, and it was turned to a particular page that had a story by one of my favorite poets and authors, a man who simply calls himself Sparrow. And the title of that article was Goodbye Patriarchy. So amazingly, he talks about the exact nature of this new cycle we're in, which I too, along with many of you, have said, Judith, what in the blink is going on, right? So I was shown by Spirit a sort of magical, but only in the sense of out of ego and into spirit. It's sort of a connect the dots for all these events that I have been writing about and talking to you about since 2008. And that is exactly the subject of Sparrow's article. And Sparrow says it so well. He says, what's going on? The answer is simple. We are witnessing the slow death of the patriarchy. But what is the patriarchy? The patriarchy is the domination of women by men. It's been going on throughout recorded history, and actually he goes on to speculate about pre-recorded history being perhaps a matriarchal culture, but nevertheless, he gives an example of the abuse of power that goes with that. He says, according to the book of Genesis, the first woman was fashioned by God out of Adam's rib, because Adam was lonely and needed a helpmate. This completely inverts the biological fact that all men are born out of women. And in the past, we have swallowed such irrational and illogical arguments simply because they came from so-called respected authority. But now, protests in the street and the revolutionary transformations that have been going on for the past decade have had a theme of beheading the dictators. Now, in the literal sense of the ego, that's a very unpleasant thought, but think of it metaphorically, that inside yourself, we have those little beliefs, maybe sometimes very big, that are self-destructive, that we use to prove our own unlovable status. We use it to prove we're not really worthy. We use it to belittle ourselves by hearing that inner dictator who is bent on one method for handling everything, and that is fault-finding and blame. So obviously, that keeps us all feeling not good about ourselves and sometimes lost in guilt and shame. And that's the real beheading, cutting the power off for 10,000s of lies that we have told ourselves and have believed throughout our lifetime, but are limitations to this magnificent spirit that is who we truly are, right? We are here as messengers of love. But again, we can't give a message that we haven't first read for ourselves. We can't give what we don't have. So I'll give you an example, small example. I had a speaking engagement last week that I ended up somehow in front of this big audience, feeling inspired to tell something particularly personal about my own life, something very intimate. And at the end, everybody I thought was being very gracious about, oh, what a great speech and so forth. But when I got alone in my car going home, and remember, the ego strikes back when you're alone. That's like juicy territory for that loud ego voice to overcome the quiet voice of peace and love. So right away, the fault finder dictators in my head started at me. And by the time I got home, which wasn't much more than 15 minutes, I was filled with shame about what I had said and shared about myself. Now, this is coming from me, a woman who believes in transparency, who believes that secrets keep us sick. But I had trouble shaking it until I felt so miserable that I paused in peace and acted in awareness. And for me, that is often reading one of my books of uplifting spiritual thoughts. And that really helps me because we can't just say, I'm no longer going to think of myself as unlovable or worthless, because that just leaves it in the negative. We have to literally reprogram it with new information that you are so lovable, that everything about me, about you, including bumps, warts, mistakes, errors, all kinds of mess ups, it just doesn't matter. That was all an ego game to begin with. It was set out to destroy us and to make us losers, because remember, the ego's main tenet is seek, but do not find. So we seek for love. We try affirmations to love ourselves. And under the ego's guidance, we don't find any of it. And the celestial juice that we're going to get this week, especially towards the time of the weekend, there are going to be open gateways where we have the energy of persistence, yes, but also patience that helps us master whatever it is that we want to change in our belief systems. Because the moon in Cancer this Saturday, November 16th, and remember, I was suggesting you watch every month when the moon goes through the sign of Cancer, because she is then triggering that big 500-year meetup of Saturn and Pluto. So what does that mean? We are claiming our own power, the power that we have given away. We are reclaiming it by using our voice and resonating with this energy, which has such patience and persistence for change. So it's like we're that beautiful green blade of grass that has been weaving its way through the cracks in the cement sidewalk and has reached the sunlight. And now we are stretching ourselves taller. We are stretching ourselves into our full growth as messengers of love. and using that objectivity and practicality of this big transit to show how we have made that work in our own personal lives. As love finders, we see the green, beautiful great blades of grass, and we don't focus on the hard journey through the cement. It's meaningless because, after all, it's past, and so it's over. We are reaching higher and higher for the brighter and brighter light, and we are using that to simply, in our day-to-day world, do the next right thing. So our homework is to go tell someone close to us how much they mean to you. I say that with such love and confidence because I know you are an A+ audience. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week. Bye for now.